Chapter 556. Reading. Gunan stood in mid-air of the Dongshu heaven and coldly looked at the people below. The shadows were still rapidly invading. Completely destroying the Dongshu heaven was Gunan's plan, and he would not easily change it because of other things. He had never cared about others when he did things. After reaching his current realm, there were even fewer people who could affect him. Just as Gunan was determined to do things his way, three figures slowly floated into mid-air. There were two men and one woman dressed like Taoists. One of the two men was old and the other was young. The young man had red lips and white teeth. He was only as tall as Gunan's waist. However, his expression was calm and he did not look like a child. The old man looked like he was on the verge of death. He looked haggard, as if he had one foot in the coffin. The woman was even weirder. She was clearly dressed like a Taoist nun, and her expression was calm and solemn. However, she strangely exuded a seductive aura. This did not seem to be intentional on her part. Instead, it was natural. To be honest, it was rare to see such a Taoist woman in the peaceful Dongshu heaven. The leader of the three was the old man. He came in front of Gunan and bowed deeply to Gunan. "I am Shu Huan. Greetings, Lord. Please be magnanimous." It was rare that Gunan did not kill the old man with one punch. This was because the old man was holding something in his hand. It was an open scroll with 4 names written on it: Jiupa, Huang Quan Taoist, Shueshan Jusher, and Gunan. Knowing about the existence of Huang Quan Taoist and being able to list him together with Jiupa and Gunan, it was obvious that the Dongshu heaven, as the leader of the heavens, was not ignorant. However, even though he did not make a move, the shadows were still rapidly invading the surroundings. The woman hurriedly said, "Lord, please stop. The Dongshu heaven has countless scrolls that record ancient secrets," and Gunan coldly interrupted, "I am not interested in ancient times. Were I do those old things that died in the river of time, half for me to understand them." Having a long history was never a big deal. How powerful the Dongshu heaven's ancestor was had nothing to do with Gunan. If not for the 4 names in Taoist Shu Huan's hand, he would not have given them the chance to speak. His gaze shifted to Shu Huan, and he asked in a deep voice, "Who is Snow Mountain Hermit?" Gunan was just asking casually. He didn't care if the other party answered or not. Of course, it would be for the best if he was willing to answer. But if he wasn't willing to answer, he would have to massacre the entire hollowed void heaven to find the answer. Taoist Shu Huan, on the other hand, had a very honest look on his face. He quickly answered, "Hermit Shueshan died 23,000 years ago. His life, knowledge, and expertise are all in the Dongshu heaven. Sir, please follow me to take a look." The childlike Taoist also spoke at this moment. His voice sounded very old, like the hoarseness of a middle-aged man. "As long as Sir is willing to let my grotto void heaven live for a bit, I will let Yu Lian be dealt with by Sir." As he said this, he glanced at the woman beside him. Her sister, Yu Luo, is the same. It was only then that Gunan found out that this woman was Yu Lian's sister. However, he had heard that Yu Lian had an older sister. It was just that no one had ever seen her before. When Yu Luo heard this, she could not help but turn her head in shock. Her eyes were still filled with confusion and confusion. Clearly, this was not within the scope of their previous agreement. Gunan's gaze paused for a moment. The invasion of his shadow power finally stopped. The sky full of shadows retracted and landed behind Gunan. "Take me to see the information on Snow Mountain Hermit," Gunan said to Shu Huan. Taoist Shu Huan bowed again, turned around, and led Gunan away. In the great hall of the Tao sect, Gunan stood in front of a bookshelf that was dozens of stories tall. He was flipping through a scroll in his hand. This was originally the residence of the Tao sect leader. Now that Yu Lian had lost her position, this great hall temporarily belonged to Gunan. It was not that he was interested in the Tao sect. It was just that all the information that he wanted was here. After reading a scroll, Gunan casually put it aside. The scroll automatically floated to a certain spot on the bookshelf. Another scroll appeared out of thin air in Gunan's hand. This information was all about Snow Mountain Hermit. Snow Mountain Hermit's surname was Wang. His real name was no longer known. People only knew that he liked to call himself Snow Mountain Hermit. He even called his residents Snow Mountain residents. He even established a small sect called Snow Mountain Sect. It was this person who had a special liking for Snow Mountain. Yet, he had displayed astonishing foresight at the beginning of his rise. Regardless of whether it was his judgment of the situation or his understanding of the cultivation methods of the various sects, he was far superior to ordinary people. More importantly, he had once made predictions about major events in the heavens and benefited from them. After such behavior happened many times, the Azura heaven started to make a special judgment on him. In Gunan's eyes, this person was clearly the same type of person as Morag. Their actions were too similar. What was special was that this Snow Mountain Hermit did not live until now. He did not even manage to become a planet lord. He died in a small world. This is a shame for all transmigrators. Gunan could not help but shake his head and speak to himself. As he read on, he realized he could not blame Snow Mountain Hermit. It was just that his luck was too bad. When he died, he did not even break the world. He did not even have the right to leave that small world. Yet he accidentally encountered two visitors from outer space fighting. The two planet lords fought in that small world. The battleground was very close to Snow Mountain Sect. That was how Snow Mountain Hermit died. If he really is a transmigrator and understands history, he should know that he could not have fought against the planet lords. Since that's the case, then why does he insist on staying in the sect and not lie low for the time being? Some doubts arose in Gunan's mind, but then he thought of a possibility. Of course, Shu Huan was next to him and said, although Snow Mountain Hermit died in that battle, his Snow Mountain sect still exists. It still exists today. Is there anything special about it? Gunan asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes. Shu Huan nodded. There is a building in Snow Mountain Sect that has not decayed after 20,000 years. Snow Mountain Sect students can go there and receive a special opportunity. No matter what the so-called special opportunity was, the fact that the building was undying for 20,000 years was enough for Gunan to confirm his suspicions. This had to be the power of the original world's origin. Snow Mountain Hermit was so weak that even Jiu Pa and Huang Quan Taoist did not notice him, but Dongshu Heaven did. Dongshu Heaven did not even know where Gunan and the others came from. They did not even know about the existence of the original world, but they were able to notice the strangeness of these people and the connection between them. This was because Dongshu Heaven was the leader of all the skies. They had a lot of information. After careful analysis, it was not difficult to come to this conclusion. Chapter 557. Read, the Dongshu Heaven might not know what big data was, but that didn't stop them from using it. Their metaphysical technology had enough computing power, and they also had enough methods to collect information. Therefore, analyzing and integrating this information was a matter of course. Jiupa and Huang Quan Taoist might have understood this, but they knew how secretive the original realm was, so they didn't want to leave this part of the work to others. If they wanted to rely on one person to control big data, it was inevitable that they wouldn't be able to do it. Gunan was still looking at information about Shueshan Jushur. Gunan had always been patient with people who were suspected to be transmigrators. He didn't want to miss out on any details. Gunan seemed to be the only one left in the temple. When he finished reading all the information, he found Yulien standing in front of him. At this time, Yulien wasn't wearing her usual Taoist robe. Instead, she had changed into normal clothes. However, her eyes were calm, as usual. Gunan looked at her curiously. It wasn't that he didn't understand what the Dongshu Heaven meant. Whether it was a hostage or a spoil of war, handing over Yulien was the inevitable result. What made Gunan curious was that Yulien's aura was very weak at the moment. It was far from her usual 14th level realm. She had almost fallen below path integration. This was very strange. Even if the astral boundary was destroyed, the Planet Master's realm wouldn't be affected much. It would just lose the source of power, and it would be more difficult to replenish it. At the same time, the Planet Master who lost the astral boundary couldn't advance any further unless he rebuilt the astral boundary. But the Dongshu Heaven was still fine, and Yulien was only slightly injured. How could her realm have fallen so much? As if seeing through Gunan's doubts, Yulian smiled. The Dongshu heaven has been passed down for many generations, and the astral boundary is still intact. Do you know where the previous planet masters went? That was indeed a strange thing. For path integration cultivators, it was almost impossible for the astral boundary to be intact and the planet master to fall. This was because to kill a path integration cultivator, they first had to erase their astral boundary, just like how Austin and the others destroyed the divine Emperor Heaven. Gunan thought about it and said, "Do you hand over the Star Lord every time you can't win?" Yulian was slightly stunned and then said speechlessly, "In the past 10,000 years, you're the first person who could force the True Path sect to hand over their sect master." In order to prevent Gunan from making any more strange associations, Yulian took the initiative to explain, the Taoist sect has its own unique inheritance. Ever since the founding of the sect, there has never been a Star Master for 100,000 years. As she spoke, she placed one hand on the bookshelf beside her, and a file automatically appeared in her hand under her will. Gunan took the file from Yulian's hands and looked down. The rope at the top was actually golden. In the past, this was a top secret, and only the headmaster had access to it. Other than the sect leader who used a special method to open it, no one else could open this golden rope. "You can open it?" Gunan looked at Yulian and asked as he waved the scroll in his hand. "I'm no longer the sect master of the True Path sect." Yulian shook her head. "Oh," Gunan responded, and then he casually pulled, and the golden rope broke with a sound. Yulian was already used to this kind of situation, but she still couldn't help but roll her eyes. At the same time, she subconsciously moved away from Gunan. She was no longer the Star Lord of the Dongshu Heaven. Maybe Gunan could directly make her body collapse if he touched her. Gunan quickly browsed through the content. This was a personal letter written by one of the True Path sect masters, and this sect master was the founder of the Dongshu Heaven. According to history, this sect master should have taken the essence from the heaven when the three realms collapsed. That was how the Dongshu Heaven of today was created. If Gunan remembered correctly, his Taoist name should be Miao Su. Miao Su was a true genius. He had cultivated to become a saint in less than 300 years. He had even turned the tide when the heavens were in danger, and he had single-handedly created the structure of the heavens. From the destruction of the three realms to the inner world, and then to the inheritance of the Dongshu Heaven, he had played a part in everything. However, the content of this personal letter was very strange. First, he described in detail a method of inheritance that could actually pass on the enlightenment of the Tao integration realm. However, the price was that this enlightenment could not last for long. Because of this, every generation of sect master in the Dongshu Heaven could not last for more than 100,000 years. Most of them were forced to pass on their position after only 10,000 years. This method seemed to have many flaws, but when one considered the difficulty of Tao integration, it was actually quite superior. It could almost guarantee that there were Tao integration realm cultivators in the astral boundary, unlike some astral boundaries, which would directly fall out of the ranks of Tao integration realm cultivators. After such a long speech, the real content of this personal letter was revealed. It said that this Miao Su did not have long to live. The person who had injured him was a person that Gu Nan was very familiar with. It was Jiopa. Jiopo's fate is unpredictable. His fate seems to have appeared out of thin air. He has neither a past nor a future. Descendants must be careful. These were Miao Su's original words. Gunan was very clear about how Jiopa had come about. The history gradually formed a line in his mind. He had thought that it would end here. However, he did not expect that at the end of the personal letter, Miao Su would leave such a sentence after a series of emotional sighs. The loss of the land is indeed an outlier. I regret not listening to Junior Brother's words. Gunan raised his head, looked at Yulian, and asked, "Who is this Junior Brother that he is talking about?" "You know him." Yulian seemed to have been relieved of a burden. She fiddled with her hair with a relaxed expression. "Back then, I left the Tao sect because of Jiopa. My martial granduncle was the Yin-Yang Taoist, who is the current Lu one." A strange look appeared in Gunan's eyes. As if he had understood something, he suddenly closed the file in his hand. Bring me to the small dimension where Snow Mountain Practitioner lives. In a small dimension, Gunan and Yulian walked side by side. They arrived at a bare mountain. This used to be the base of the Snow Mountain sect. Of course, it was still the same now. However, the current Snow Mountain sect only had a few kittens and puppies left. It had fallen to the extreme. However, although there were few disciples in the Snow Mountain sect, there were many people who came to sightsee. In fact, the sect's survival was largely due to the entrance fee. A strange building that was still intact after 20,000 years was very attractive to many cultivators. There were even some who specially joined the Snow Mountain sect just to seek a fortuitous encounter. What is the fortuitous encounter that the building gives? Gunan asked casually. Chapter 558. Read, the strange building of the Snow Mountain sect was indeed a famous scenic spot, attracting many people to come and view it. However, even though it had such a strange building, it had not developed into a large sect in the past 20,000 years, nor had it been coveted by large sections. The problem was obvious. To put it bluntly, most of the things given by the building were not of high quality. There were very few that had reached the transcendent level, and only 3 people could use it every day. Not many people were interested in it. On the other hand, the territory of the Snow Mountain sect was extremely remote. There were no resources that could be excavated, so the large sects had no interest in it. Looks like we can't move this building, Gunan said calmly as he stood in front of the so-called Hall of Chance. Because the concept of chance was too deeply rooted in people's hearts, the Snow Mountain sect named this side hall the Hall of Chance. Of course, Yulian said with a faint smile. With the power of the people in this small world, they can't even destroy it. The two of them chatted as if there was no one else around. Occasionally, some tourists would pass by, but they acted as if they didn't see them at all, walking straight past them. Gunan slowly walked into the Hall of Chance and saw a huge statue of a Tao Venerable in the center. There were also 3 prayer mats below it. 2 of them had already been turned over, and a person was respectfully worshiping on the last one. After kneeling 3 times and kowtowing 9 times, a secret manual was placed in front of him. This person ran out ecstatically and kept showing off to his senior and junior brothers. Among the chances given by the Hall of Chance, cultivation techniques were usually the most valuable. Gunan saw this and shook his head lightly. He said to Yulian, "Let's go. You finished reading?" This time, it was Yulian's turn to be curious. In fact, this was not the first time she had come to see this, but she couldn't tell what was so special about the entire process. In fact, this was just the creation process of the rules of the world. Perhaps someone had used some special method to attract a small portion of the world's origin and randomly created these small things. It could be a formation, or it could be some kind of treasure, but none of this could surprise the mighty planet master of the cavernous void heaven. Gunan just shook his head and didn't say anything. He knew far better than Yulian what this meant. The source of the world used for creation was unfamiliar to Yulian, but Gunan was very familiar with it. It was the source of the original realm, number 059812. This Snow Mountain householder was also from the original realm. However, the power he obtained from the original realm was clearly in the form of a clan. It was also because of this that when the 2 Star Lords fought, he had no choice but to stay in the sect, and, in the end, he was unfortunately affected. Perhaps it wasn't that he didn't want to run, but if the sect couldn't survive, it would be useless even if he ran. Gunan sat in front of his desk. On the desk was a piece of paper with a row of names written from top to bottom. Jiopa, Duality Taoist, Ling, Netherworld Taoist, Shueshan Jusher, Lu Wun, Gunan, and Morag. This was the result of all the people who were currently related to the original realm in chronological order. It could be said that the appearance of Shueshan Jusher and Duality Taoist had truly filled in the gaps in time. After doing this, Gunan drew a connecting red line between the names Shueshan Jusher and Lu Wun. If one looked at the timeline again, they would discover something very interesting. Every time a name appeared, it was when the previous person was about to complete the final transformation. Shueshan Jusher appeared before Jiopa took over the original realm, but there wasn't much time left. He couldn't stop it at all. He even risked going to his senior brother to advise him, but his senior brother, Miaoshu Taoist, didn't believe him. Ling's life was unknown, and Netherworld Taoist also appeared before Ling completely disappeared. Shueshan Jushi was born before Netherworld Taoist advanced to path integration. When it came to Luwan, there was a slight gap. Because of an accident, Shueshan Jushi unfortunately died before he could succeed, so he could only be ignored. But then this pattern appeared again. Within a mere 100 years after Gunnan's debut, Luwan completed his awakening and regained the two laws of time and space. And just when Gunnan was about to destroy the world, Morag appeared with a segment of history. As the transmigrators were found one by one, the pattern of visitors from the original realm seemed to gradually appear in front of Gunnan. Of course, this was not without contradictions. For example, according to the information he had previously learned, Luwan should have been brought out by Netherworld Taoist, but he was actually in the quota of the original realm. Another example was that Netherworld Taoist claimed to have seen the history of Jiu-Pa, but according to the pattern, it should have been Shueshan Jushi who had seen this part of history. Netherworld is lying. Gunnan gently placed his pen on the table. After a moment of silence, he muttered to himself, Luwan's past life and current life may have long been in contact with Netherworld. Gunnan didn't think it was a big deal that Netherworld was hiding some things from him. For someone like him who had stayed in the gap between the two realms for tens of thousands of years, if he told him everything, that would be very stupid. Gunnan never believed in information that was easily obtained from the mouths of others. He only believed in the things that he found out bit by bit. If these things had also been tampered with, then he could only blame himself for not being smart enough and had no one else to blame. He retracted his gaze from the table. The paper was instantly burned to ashes, leaving no trace behind. Gunnan's figure appeared at the edge of the heavenly worlds and began to head towards the world of gods. He had already grasped all the information that he needed to know. Next, he just had to deal with the few lords. It just so happened that he wanted to try and see if he still had any sin points after killing a god. As for the Grotto Void Heaven, it had to be said that the Path sect had been able to stand for hundreds of thousands of years without falling. They did not rely solely on power. With the information that they had handed over and the usefulness they had shown in the matter of Snow Mountain Practitioner, the Path sect had given Gunnan a reason to let them go. With such a sect that monitored the world, who knew they might be able to discover things that he had not noticed. Of course, if Gunnan had to choose between intelligence and power, he would definitely choose the latter. If he could kill an enemy with a single punch, why would he need a brain? The world of gods. Within the Holy Light Kingdom, the remaining 5 lords of the world of gods were gathered together. Even Daisy and Bayer had stepped into this god kingdom that they would never have entered in the past. It could only be said that in the face of the threat of the evil god, the battle between the two god systems had become meaningless. The evil god is no longer something that we can resist. Austin sighed softly. His laws and power, we can't threaten him at all. Is there no other way? Daisy's face was still a little pale. The injury that Gunnan had inflicted on her was so severe that it had almost hurt her life force. Austin was silent for a long time. Finally, he turned his gaze to the person beside him. One last way. All our hopes are on you. The person he was staring at was the Lord of War, Eugene. Chapter 559. Read. Eugene stood in the void, watching the god kingdom crumble before his very eyes. He could not help but feel a sense of reluctance. This was his god kingdom. That's right, the war god kingdom that Gunnan did not manage to destroy in time was personally disbanded by Eugene, who then destroyed it. As the master of the god kingdom, when Eugene decided to destroy the god kingdom, he was more efficient than anyone else. In the blink of an eye, the war god kingdom had been completely destroyed in the void, the entire plane collapsing. If he had a choice, Eugene would not want to do this, but as Austin had said, this was their only chance. If they could kill the evil god, all sacrifices would be worth it. When Gunnan arrived at the Pantheon world, he quickly discovered the strangeness of this place. The Pantheon world was a place he was very familiar with, so he immediately noticed something was wrong the moment he arrived. The laws of the entire world seemed to be overlapping. If he looked closely, he could see that the overlapping parts were light and darkness. Gunan's gaze landed on the void. He saw that the holy light divine kingdom and the darkness divine kingdom were slowly merging together in a strange way. At the border of the two god kingdoms, a pale golden scale floated slowly. Austin and Daisy stood at the two ends, guiding the two god kingdoms to connect. A sudden sense of danger rose in Gunan's heart. With his current realm, he had a strong premonition for danger. Clearly, what these two were doing was enough to threaten him. Run, or stop them in time. The moment this thought arose in Gunan's mind, his instincts immediately gave him the answer. He had to stop them. If he delayed any longer, Gunan might not have the chance to enter the Pantheon world. More importantly, with his current strength, there was no need for him to be overcautious. Gunan took a step forward, his figure instantly landing in front of Austin and Daisy, his fist already smashing down on the golden scale. This was his straightforward punch, without changing his moves, without any cover. His target was written all over their faces. However, neither Austin nor Daisy could do anything about this punch. Be it nomological laws or divine bodies, they had no way of blocking this punch. No one could stop him. That was why he was invincible. The fist smashed heavily on the golden scale. This embodiment of the law of justice was not affected by the rules of inertia, mechanics, motion, and so on. Despite being hit by such a punch, it still stood steadily in the void. Gunan only felt as if he had smashed into the void. There was clearly a real sensation of touch, but there was no reaction at all. It was extremely strange. However, Gunan was not discouraged at all. A sinister smile appeared on his face as his fists rained down on the golden scales. Each punch was enough to shatter the void. In fact, there were no longer any laws around the scales of justice. Only justice was left struggling to hold on. Cracks began to appear on the base of the scale, and golden liquid even flowed out from the cracks. It was as if the scale was a living thing. Austin watched all of this coldly, but the process of connecting the two divine kingdoms sped up a bit. While Gunan was punching, his law of shadows was not idle. Endless shadows directly squeezed into the center of the two worlds, frantically devouring the surrounding light and darkness. Given Gunan's current nomological powers, be it holy light or darkness, they could only seek self-preservation in the face of shadows. They had no way of retaliating at all. However, Austin and Daisy did not care about this at all. They only focused on merging the two divine kingdoms. After all, Gunan had come alone. Even if he was already half a third transformation, it was still impossible for him to compete with two divine kingdoms in terms of the total number of laws. Therefore, the matter of the shadows splitting the divine kingdoms was just a casual action by Gunan. His ultimate goal was to completely destroy the scales of justice in the shortest time possible. Crack! Another punch landed, and the left arm of the golden scale finally broke. Austin, who was standing there, shrank and almost fell into the void. Therefore, Austin sighed softly. I still can't wait until it's completely completed, but it's enough. Daisy's expression was solemn. There was no change in her expression at all. She only slowly raised an arm. In her hand, the divine kingdom's origin, which represented the ultimate law of darkness, was rapidly falling into the holy light divine kingdom. At the same time, Austin did the same thing. In the past, it would have been unimaginable to hand over one's origin to a mortal enemy whose laws were the opposite of one's. However, at this moment, with the help of the scales of justice, light and darkness completed a true exchange for the first time. As light and darkness merged, the golden scale suddenly exploded. Austin and Daisy's figures disappeared at the same time, merging into the two divine kingdoms. Gunan looked up and frowned slightly. This was because he saw that the two divine kingdoms were already riddled with holes. Shockingly, the two of them had destroyed them of their own accord. Once the extremely unstable divine kingdoms lost the restraint of the two of them, countless nomological laws exploded in the void. However, such a disorderly explosion of nomological laws clearly could not harm Gunan. These nomological laws did not really leak out, either. Instead, they were all absorbed into the center. The exploding golden scale formed a vortex that seemed to be sucking in all forces. Meanwhile, Gunan simply stood by the side and watched indifferently. He had a feeling that Austin's arrangements were complete. No matter where he went, the golden vortex would definitely land on him. Since that was the case, he might as well see what they were up to. Countless light and darkness converged. The golden light in the void shone to its peak, and then suddenly retracted, turning into a small scale that directly imprinted on Gunan's chest. Gunan lowered his head to take a look. This scale had clearly penetrated his shadow law and his body, and was directly imprinted on his spirit. The final means that Austin and Daisy had almost paid with their lives was clearly not so simple. Speaking of which, in the history that Morag knew, he had also been sealed by them at the cost of their lives. So this was the seal? Gunan casually used a shadow blade to cut off the flesh on his chest, and the scale imprint landed in his hand. However, he knew that this was just the surface. The imprint hidden deep in his spirit was far from being so easily removed. However, the mass of flesh in Gunan's hand actually underwent a strange change at this moment. It gradually faded until it completely disappeared from Gunan's hand. At the same time, Gunan felt that he seemed to have become a little lighter. It was a strange feeling, as if he was a little further away from this world. Thus, he began to understand what Austin and Daisy had done. Chapter 560. Reading. Truth was a type of divine art. The more majestic the laws and the more devout the worshippers were, the more they liked to teach this divine art. Austin's holy light worshippers were very good at truth. So in the game, Gunan had seen the power of truth more than once. If one were to look deeper into the theory, truth was a type of karma spell. When the user wanted to complete something, they would pay enough power to the world, far exceeding the task itself, and then leave the completion process to the world. In this process, the excess power was actually used for transformation, just handing over what one could not do to the omnipotent laws of the world. The exile truth was a classic example. The spellcaster paid a huge amount of power to exile a powerful enemy into a different dimension, making it impossible for them to return. The exile of mortals was just throwing them into another plane. In the world of gods, non-gods could not travel between planes, so naturally they could not return. At the level of gods, there was also the effect of a space cage. The spellcaster would be restrained by the power, and would only have a chance to leave when the power paid was used up. At the level of gods, to be precise, it was at the cost of the lives of the light and darkness main gods. No one in history had ever seen an exile divine art released in this way. Gunan could clearly sense that the process of being banished was continuing without end, and he was being pulled into an unknown territory. If he waited for the exile to complete, he might disappear from this place completely and go to a place where he could not return. As for where he would end up, Austin himself probably did not know. The specialty of truth was that it only cared about the result and left the process to the world. Interesting. Gunan felt his power constantly turning incorporeal, but he was not worried. The art of truth wasn't invincible in the end, and if one wanted to trap Gunan, then one would first have to possess an immeasurable amount of strength. And Gunan could wait for the truth to complete and then use his fist to smash the cage open. Is this the so-called seal? Gunan thought of himself in the history. In the end, they all disappeared. Seal or exile, it was almost the same. However, what Gunan could be sure of was that the evil god in the history had not reached the third transformation level. After all, the reason why Gunan was able to complete his third-class advancement was because he had found the source serial number on Morag. In the original history, there was no such person as Morag. The original realm's prediction of history was likely to be discontinuous. Whenever the previous period of history was about to end, a new prediction would appear. The two divine kingdoms had collapsed. Austin and Boswell had sacrificed themselves, but Bayer and Boswell had already disappeared without a trace. Even Eugene had disappeared. The Lord of War destroyed his own kingdom and erased all traces of himself from the world. This way, not even Gunan could find him. However, Gunan didn't care about this. What he wanted was to control two worlds, not Eugene's life and death. However, there was another discovery that made Gunan a little worried. After a simple test, Gunan found that killing gods did not seem to give him any sin points. Just as Gunan had expected, the sin value was actually a product of the evil divine temple. Originally, the evil divine temple was under his control, so he could use the sin value to strengthen himself. Now that the evil divine temple was gone, he could no longer benefit from killing gods. Even though Gunan could be considered invincible now, he had seen someone who had reached the third transformation realm. He wanted to see if there was a way to reach that stage. If I can't take the final step, then I'll put it aside for now. Gunan quickly made a decision. The banishment will take effect in 2 months at most. I'll take advantage of this time to finish what I need to set up. Conquering the Pantheon world went smoother than Gunan had expected. Only the banishment divine spell was a little unexpected. However, Austin had no other choice. He could only use the true spell to bypass Gunan's super strong defense in order to banish the evil god. Now that the Pantheon world no longer had a main god, even if he hid in the dark, he would not dare to show his face. It was completely up to the heavenly realm to rule. After Gunan returned to the heavenly realm, he did not hesitate to order the various astral lords to launch a large-scale invasion. He wanted to completely control the Pantheon world. The Hunt God Handbook version 2.0 was also launched. It instantly became a nightmare for the gods, and large numbers of gods were brutally massacred. Because of the godhood's nurturing effect on world breakers, it became a delicious cake in the eyes of the astral lords. This was especially true for some high-level gods, who rarely died on the battlefield. Under Gunan's instructions, even the fusing gods participated in the battle. Even though most of the fusing gods' astral realms had not been completely rebuilt, their own strength was more than enough to deal with those below the fusing gods. The gods were hunted down and executed in large numbers. Their godhood became the spoils of war for the astral lords. Some weaker gods were even imprisoned and became the enemy's playthings. The Pantheon world experienced all the treatment that a land ruled by violence should receive. However, Gunan was indifferent to all of this. All he wanted was to control both worlds. In a laboratory, Gunan looked calmly at Morag and Zero. The two of them were each placed in a cultivation chamber. A specific ratio of the world's origins was used as a cultivation fluid, and they were being replaced batch by batch, as if it cost nothing. This method was actually quite extravagant. Back when Gunan was still a rank 4 or 5, he had to go to the Astral Gate to complete a mission just for a small handful of world's origins. Now, for the sake of these two's absorption efficiency, they did not wait for the world's origins to be fully absorbed before swapping them out. Instead, they were using the world's origins as cheap cultivation fluid. This was extremely extravagant. However, Gunan did not care. Now that there were so many planes in the heavenly realm, all the origins were free for him to use. He only needed to convert them into a specific ratio for the original realm. How's the situation? Gunan walked to the workbench in the laboratory and asked the researcher who was stationed here. The researcher hurriedly handed the observation report to Gunan and reported the recent situation. However, in reality, the progress here was not fast. One could even say that there was no progress at all. Morag was doing slightly better. As the world's origins continued to be poured into him, the level of his skills continued to increase. However, Zero was different. The boundary of fusing gods was too important. Even her system was very inefficient in this regard. This was the result of countless worlds' origins being poured into her. The similarity between the two was that neither could be completed within 2 months. Gunan could not see the results before he left. Then we'll talk about it after I return. Gunan shook his head lightly and disappeared from the laboratory. Chapter 561. Read. Taoist Netherworld disappeared. Just like when he appeared, he disappeared from the world inexplicably, as if he had never existed. Of course, he did not accurately predict the time of Gunan's arrival. He had probably already left this place and had no intention of meeting Gunan. Gunan patrolled around the original realm and confirmed that there was no trace of Daoist netherworld. He could not help but frown and say, he can't know that Dongshu Heaven has collected so much information, so why did he run away? However, although he did not know why Daoist netherworld ran away, the fact that the other party avoided him showed that he was not confident in his own strength. Daoist netherworld knew that if they met, he would probably die at the hands of Gunan. This was the reason why he ran away. However, the timing of his escape was indeed exquisite. If a path integration cultivator was determined to hide, even Gunan would find it difficult to find him. He was not like the main gods in the Divine War. There is a large amount of aura left in the destroyed Divine Kingdom, which could be traced by Gunan to the original body. For someone like Eugene, who destroyed the Divine Kingdom with his own hands without leaving a trace, and then hid in a small plane, it would undoubtedly be difficult to find him. Daoist netherworld did not even have an astral realm, so his hiding would undoubtedly be even more secretive. Gunan confirmed that Daoist netherworld was not nearby and could not help but frown. He then returned to the heavenly worlds and ordered them to carry out a comprehensive search. The target of the search expanded from Fucheng to Daoist netherworld. Is Daoist netherworld really still alive? Yu Yin sat calmly beside Gunan and helped him write down the prophecy that was about to be issued. Although he had already controlled the two major worlds, Gunan had never liked to do things on the surface. Therefore, Dongshu Heaven was in charge on his behalf, and all orders were issued through the Path Sect. As for his own divine kingdom, it was still developing steadily and was not affected by the twists and turns of the outside world. Yu Yin, the former Path Sect leader, seemed to have become Gunan's personal scribe. Whenever Gunan had any requests, she needed to fulfill them through various administrative means. When it came to handling practical matters, even 100 Gunans couldn't compare to Yu Yin's. Even the cabinet in his god kingdom couldn't compare. After all, Gunan's god nation was only so big. Regardless of whether it was the matters he had to deal with or the enemies he had to deal with, it was far from being comparable to the paradise. As the leader of the heavens, the Dongshu Heaven could influence more than 80% of the worlds in the universe. This was already a terrifying number. In a time of such urgency, Gunan would certainly adopt the most efficient method. Alive, Gunan didn't intend to hide it and nodded. Not only did he want to announce Netherworld Taoist life and death, but he also wanted to integrate his appearance, breath, habits, and other information as the basis for his subordinates to search. Gunan had already mastered some of these materials, and some of them came from the dossiers of the Dongshu Heaven. This colossus that had ruled the universe for several epochs indeed had its own unique points. Under Gunan's order, all the major forces were mobilized, and a large amount of manpower and material resources were put into the search. However, this operation obviously wouldn't be effective in a short period of time. Whether or not Fucheng had come to the two great worlds and which corner she was in, no one knew. However, it would be difficult to find her quickly. Needless to say, Netherworld Taoist was even more difficult. With the means of a dignified path-fusing practitioner, this was destined to be a long and drawn-out task. Of course, the only information Gunan kept about Netherworld Taoist was that he had already advanced to the path-fusing realm. If people knew that he had quietly integrated the path, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't think that he was outside the two worlds. Gunan didn't want the original realm to be exposed. As time passed, Gunan stayed in the main hall of the Path Sect. Occasionally, he flipped through the materials on the bookshelves, but most of the time, he was doing experiments. He was doing a comprehensive test of his current state, analyzing and recording everything from the nature of the nomological laws to the various powers of his body. Of course, this also included the mark of life and death. It seemed that because the caster had disappeared, the power of the mark of life and death was gradually fading. Under the erosion of the body of the evil god, even the structure of the mark was beginning to become unstable. This mark, which the gods had once placed high hopes on, had been staked with the entire divine kingdom of Bayer. In the end, it was ruined because of Gunan's unexpected third transformation. Now, Austin and Daisy had no choice but to pay with their lives and place their hopes on the banishing divine art. It had to be said that the power of the banishing divine art was indeed continuing to take effect. As 2 months passed, Gunan's body had faded to the point that it was almost illusory, almost incorporeal. It could be said that the current Gunan's power was already very weak. His current punch was far from the point of breaking the rules. It was probably about the same as when he had not completed the second transformation, and such power was still rapidly weakening. Of course, on the other hand, Gunan had never been as safe as he was now. His influence on the outside world had been weakened, but it was the same the other way around. If the outside world wanted to affect him, they would have to put in tens of thousands of times more effort. And with Gunan's strength, it was almost impossible for them to hurt him. Yulian had personally witnessed the entire process of the banishing divine art. Moreover, as Gunan had been carrying out his experiments at an unhurried pace, she was especially sensitive to the weakening of Gunan's data. She did not have too many questions. After all, she was a character who had once stood at the peak of the world. She had a clear understanding of such an obvious principle. In Yulian's eyes, Gunan seemed to be continuously moving his main body to a specific place. It was just that Yulian did not understand why this process was so difficult. On this day, Gunan did not do anything, which was rare. He merely sat quietly in the Taoist hall, waiting for the banishing divine art to be completed. He was already very, very far away from this world. He was so far away that if his power wished to descend here, he could only display an extremely weak portion of its effects. However, just then, a piece of news appeared on the table in the Taoist hall. Yulian, who had been standing behind Gunan, was slightly stunned. She quickly picked up the piece of news and handed it to Gunan. In the last few days, Gunan had started to have difficulty even coming into contact with the real thing. If Gunan were to take it himself, his hand might just pass through the piece of paper. Of course, Yulian had her own selfish motives. For a piece of news to suddenly arrive at such a critical moment, Yulian could not believe that it was a coincidence. Therefore, she really wanted to see what was written inside. Therefore, she saw that the information on the piece of paper was very simple. It could even be summarized in one sentence. Chapter 562. Yulian stared blankly at this sentence. After a while, she turned back to look at Gunan. She suddenly felt that even though she was once the master of the Dongshu heaven, there were still many things in this world that she did not understand. Taoist netherworld was actually a Tao integration cultivator, and Gunan had taken Zero away to keep her in a secret laboratory. Now, she had been taken away by Taoist netherworld. What do you want Zero for? What secrets did Zero have? What was the connection between Jiu, Pa, netherworld, and Gunan? These thoughts only flashed past her mind. Then, she shook her head and laughed. No matter what the answer was, it had nothing to do with her. She was now just a prisoner. I don't have much time left. Gunan looked away from the information and looked at Yulian. I'll return the Dongshu heaven to you. Help me block Jiupa and Luwan. Yulian suddenly looked up and saw that Gunan had already placed a Taoist crown in front of her. With Gunan's current strength, it was impossible for him to do this. This meant that he had already prepared for this. He had expected this. Yulian struggled to look away from the Taoist crown. The position of sect master is decided by the path sect. You know, the protective force on it is not worth mentioning to me. Gunan curled his lips disdainfully and said, Take it, and you will be the only Dongshu Heaven Star Lord in the future. Yulian gritted her teeth. She knew that Gunan was implying that the inheritance had been destroyed. Even if he did not take it, he would at most give the position to someone else. Yulian was silent for a while. Why me? You have seen my power, so you do not dare to betray me, Gunan said with a smile. I will be back. When Gunan opened his eyes again, he was already in a strange star region. The power of the banishing divine technique had gradually pulled his body out of the main world. Only when the process was complete did he truly arrive in this new place. But it was not really new, because this was actually a place that Gunan was very familiar with, the original realm. The power of exile eventually sent Gu Nan to the interior of the original realm. It wasn't that Gu Nan hadn't considered this point, so he wasn't too surprised. After all, if there's any place in this world that could trap Gu Nan, it could only be the original realm. Gu Nan's original plan was to try and see if he could enter the original realm and then break the bit wall of the original realm from the inside out. But before Gu Nan could respond, he found that the bit wall was automatically extending and gradually covering his body. This scene was just like when Fu Chang was taken away, but this time the bit wall was not to take her away, but to imprison her. This was the after effect of a banishment, an attempt to trap Gu Nan as much as possible. Gu Nan's eyes moved slightly. The third-rank shadow lock gathered on his fist, and he heavily punched the entangled bit wall. A silent, loud noise vibrated from the void. In the face of Gu Nan's third-rank punch, the bit wall of the original realm finally reacted. The bit wall seemed to be hit by a huge force, and the whole thing was constantly shaking, and even the vibration was constantly spreading outward. There's a chance. Gu Nan's spirit was lifted, and he finally saw the effect. He immediately punched a few more times and continued to bombard the same point of the bit wall. The bit wall knew how to extend itself, and it obviously had a stress response, but it was still too early to say that it had spiritual wisdom, so it could only let Gu Nan attack it. As Gu Nan's attacks continued, the vibrations of the bit wall were constantly intensifying, but for the time being, there was no sign that it couldn't withstand it. Gu Nan was not in a hurry. He was not short of time now. Even if he had to stay here for 10 or 20 years, it didn't matter. But before he disappeared, the inexplicable behavior of Taoist Netherworld made Gu Nan think of something. This mysterious guy, perhaps his understanding of the original realm was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. In terms of acting skills, the characters of this level would not lose to anyone. Time passed day by day, and Gu Nan persisted in destroying the bit wall. His progress was slow but steady. But in the outside world, everything was happening. In the world of heavens, Taoist Netherworld stood in front of Jiu Pa, and the faint smile on his face was the same as in the past. The two seemed to have returned to the time when they parted ways. Jiu Pa chose to stay in the world of heavens, so he became the most powerful Star Lord in the heavens. Taoist Netherworld chose to search for the original realm, and he did find it. Until this day, he finally returned here because he had enough confidence to face Jiu Pa. Jiu Pa stood in his own astral boundary, and the endless power of the 9 serenities pressed down on the opposite side, while Taoist Netherworld stood in midair, undergoing the baptism of the 9 serenities. Even his Taoist robe was not affected, and all the power was isolated outside, unable to hurt him at all. This is the power of the original realm? Jiu Pa's face was expressionless as he looked at Taoist Netherworld. That's right. Speaking of which, I still have to thank Gu Nan. He actually found the origin of the original realm and discovered Zero's secret. When Taoist Netherworld said this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. And now, he stopped laughing, and his expression became calm again. All of this has benefited me. People who come from the original realm all have some inexplicable abilities, but we haven't been able to unlock them. Jiupa looked at his smile and said thoughtfully, "Not us." Taoist Netherworld shook his head and said, "I am the first person with an ability, but you just don't know." A strange look appeared in Jiupa's eyes, but then he smiled and said, "No one has discovered it for so many years. You really hit it well." Taoist Netherworld sneered at Jiupa and said, "Do you want to know why? Because my ability is to devour." Yu Lian wore a crown on her head, and she sat in the Dongshu Palace with a cold expression. Below her were the higher-ups of the Path sect. Taoist Netherworld appeared in Jiupa heaven, and it is suspected that he fought with Jiupa. Then, both of them disappeared. "What I want is the result," Yu Lian interrupted her subordinate. The Taoist paused for a moment, and then said in a low voice, "The result is unknown." Yu Lian fell silent, and so did the entire palace. After a long time, she said, "What did Gu Nan find in his laboratory?" "They were using the world's origin to train 2 people. We found the remaining experimental records, the Taoist said as he handed over the records. But when he said this, his expression was very strange. Yu Yin quickly understood why this person had such a strange expression. It was because the contents of the records were too shocking. It was such an important piece of information, yet they didn't even have the intention of concealing it and just wrote it so openly. The original realm. This was the first time Yu Yin had heard of this term. After a moment, she slowly stood up. Sect leader, I need to go out for a while. Chapter 563. In Jiupa Heaven, Taoist Netherworld leisurely stepped into the place. Jiupa, who was in front of him, looked a little pale. It turns out that you really don't have an awakened ability. How disappointing. Taoist Netherworld shook his head regretfully and looked down at Jiupa. He obtained the experimental data from Gunan's laboratory. He was shocked that the origin of the original realm came this way, but at the same time, he was excited about it. Most of the travelers from the original realm had special abilities. Jiupa knew this. He even knew that these abilities were driven by some kind of power. It was just that before Gunan, Taoist Netherworld never knew that this driving force turned out to be the special origin of the original realm. But Gunan guessed wrong about one thing. It was not that Zero did not know that she had a system. In fact, she turned on the system when she first traveled, but the system ran out of power. Every traveler brought a part of the origin with them when they left the original realm. This was the original power to activate the Golden Finger. However, some people could be self-sufficient, such as Gunan and Morag. Others could only use it and could not replenish it, such as Zero and Taoist Netherworld. Zero relied on the system to rise and eventually fell because she lost the system. Taoist Netherworld was much more cautious than her. Devour? Jiupa watched as the power of the Nine Serenities was devoured bit by bit, while Taoist Netherworld's aura gradually grew stronger. Jiupa was sure that this power did not come from what Taoist Netherworld had learned, nor was it any power he knew. As a large number of rules were devoured into his body, Taoist Netherworld's power was rising steadily. In the blink of an eye, he was approaching the 14th level, and he stood directly in Jiupa Heaven, making it impossible for Jiupa to withdraw his power, even if he wanted to. He could only watch as his power skyrocketed. Not bad. With the skyrocketing power, it also seemed to affect Taoist Netherworld's mentality, making him not as calm as before. You really have to thank Gunan. If it weren't for him, how could I devour so unscrupulously? Feeling that the rules of the Nine Serenities were constantly being assimilated by him, the sense of fullness of power made Taoist Netherworld swell up. At the same time, he could no longer hide the pride in his heart. He indeed had the right to be proud because he knew that he was destined to be the final winner. Gunan had been sent to the original realm, and everything he had done had benefited Yi Futian, including the secret of the original realm's source. No wonder Gunan had grown so quickly. He had discovered this secret long ago. If he had enough origin of the original realm, his growth would not be much slower. Ever since Taoist Huang Quan made his debut, he had only dared to use his ability carefully. Even in the later stages, he didn't dare to devour a suitable target, for fear that he would use up the number of times and meet a better target in the future. But such a frugal life, when he became a great Star Lord, he still used up all the source power he carried with him. Therefore, he resolutely gave up the path of cultivation in the astral realm and even parted ways with the Nine Spirits. He stayed in the original realm for tens of thousands of years just to find a way to replenish his power. When Zero appeared, Taoist Netherworld noticed her immediately. Unfortunately, Zero's origin was also limited. More importantly, when the heavens had just collapsed, the cultivator's understanding of the world's origin was still very shallow. Taoist Netherworld was the same. He did not know what the origin was. Later, Shueshan Jusher died too early, and Gunan did not show any familiarity with history, so Taoist Netherworld missed him until Morag appeared. Perhaps fate had tricked him for so many years. After Morag was taken away by Gunan, Taoist Netherworld's luck finally changed. Not only did he take advantage of Gunan, but he also found a way to replenish his power. Coincidentally, Gu Nin was trapped in the original realm, giving him a chance to turn the tables. Wait until I devour Jiu-Pa and all the fusing cultivators. Let's see who is stronger. Taoist Netherworld's eyes were clouded. He was a witness of Gunan's battle with the main gods, so he knew about the mark of life and death, the banishing divine spell, and how strong Gunan was. But now that he had the ability to devour infinitely, he had enough confidence. What's more, he also had Gunan's biggest weakness, a man-made weakness, the original realm. Gunan's fists were still waving tirelessly, and cracks had begun to appear on the bit wall. His progress seemed to be faster than he thought. If nothing went wrong, he would have at most 2 more days to smash a hole in the original realm. However, at this moment, a figure appeared in front of him. To be precise, it appeared in the perception of his spiritual soul. The two of them were face to face, but they could not see each other, because between them was the strongest bit wall in the world, the original realm bit wall. Luwen? Gunan's hands did not stop moving, but his consciousness looked in that direction. The person who came was Luwen. In this world, besides Gunan and Taoist Netherworld, the only one who might know the location of the original realm could only be Luwen. Even Taoist Netherworld did not know the ins and outs of this person who had entered and left the original realm twice. But Gunan knew that Luwen's previous incarnation, the Yin-Yang Taoist, was originally a visitor from the original realm. Later, he reincarnated into the civilizations of the stars, and was later taken away by Taoist Netherworld. It was precisely because of this that Luwen said that becoming a saint is self-entrapment, while Taoist Netherworld knew nothing about it. Taoist Netherworld ability is to devour. Luwen's voice came slowly, and there was a strong sense of regret in it. He devoured Zero's system, and now he is looking for the 9 spirits. Only you can stop him. Although Gunan was still waving his fists, his expression was slightly startled. Taoist Netherworld's ability was to devour. When he heard this news, he immediately understood the whole story. No wonder he was willing to stay near the original realm for so many years. No wonder Luwen would come to find him at this time. Presumably, the most helpless person right now was Luwen. If Gunan, Taoist Netherworld, and Luwen were on the same track, then Luwen would undoubtedly be close to the finish line, but he would not be able to catch up to the person in front of him. Cultivation was like a race. The first person to reach the finish line would win everything. He could even block the way to the finish line, preventing those who came after him from having the chance to take that step. Transmigrators like Gunan and Taoist Netherworld possess special powers from the original realm. They could undoubtedly run faster than others, and had a higher chance of becoming first. But Jiu-Pa, who had the advantage of starting first, had voluntarily retreated. Taoist Netherworld, Zero, and the others had exhausted their source, which ultimately led to this situation. His ability is to devour. If he wins, none of you will survive, right? Gunan glanced at Luwen. Even though he could not see the other's face, he smiled and said, "That's right." Luwen exhaled heavily. If not for that, he would not have forced us all to your side. Chapter 564. Before Gunan left, he had a premonition that once he disappeared, Jiu-Pa and Taoist Huang Quan would join forces to deal with his god nation. He did not expect that because of the existence of the devouring ability, Taoist Huang Quan would be left alone. Thinking about it, it was normal. Who would be willing to work with someone who could devour them at any time to increase their strength? Unless forced, everyone would make the other choice. In comparison, although Gunan's actions were brutal, he had no motive to kill. It was better than being devoured. But with Luwen's arrival, he had completely withdrawn from the final competition. If Jiu-Pa was unfortunately devoured by Taoist Huang Quan, then only Gunan and Huang Quan would have the right to be the final competition. You gave him a chance, Luwen said seriously. If Gunan had not discovered the secret of the source, Taoist Huang Quan would not have had the chance. Gunan smiled. It doesn't matter. Speaking of which, what is your ability? Luwen was silent for a while, then slowly said, Twin. I came out of the original realm twice, both times as twins. The power of twin was the reason why Lu Wen could master the dual laws of time and space. Tell me about your departure. Lu Wen knew that he had to gain Gunan's trust, so he did not hide anything and said decisively, "We have already figured out the process of leaving the original realm, but we have only just confirmed what the original realm has done to us." Lu Wen spoke slowly. The information he revealed was somewhat outside of Gunan's expectations, but it was not much different from what he had expected. Transmigrators who left the original realm would often possess special abilities. This was determined by the uniqueness of the original realm's plane wall. We believe that this is not actually a plane wall, but a wall of rules. Lu Wen said, "Those who pass through this wall will have a certain aspect of their power strengthened by the rules." Saying this, he looked at Gunan again and smiled. "Of course, it may not be a person, but something." The heavenly worlds. Xiaopa was already at a complete disadvantage. He could not harm Taoist Huang Quan, and could only let him absorb his power. Taoist Huang Quan's own power had already reached the 14th level, and his devouring ability had become increasingly powerful, even beginning to suppress Xiaopa. "You can't escape." Taoist Huang Quan's voice was a little hoarse. He didn't have enough time to digest the large amount of netherworld energy, and it was gradually distorting his mind. Xiaopa calmly looked at him. A moment later, he said, "It's about time." At the same time, Taoist Netherworld was slightly stunned. Xiaopa suddenly raised his hand, and an exquisite pocket watch appeared in his hand. The hand of the pocket watch moved gently. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Even Taoist Netherworld's devouring power stopped. "It's all thanks to your origin." Xiaopa's cold voice finally rang out. Then, a palm suddenly struck forward, creating 9 layers of netherworld waves. Under the immense pressure of the laws, the pocket watch shattered, and time returned to normal. However, Taoist Netherworld had no way to resist the power of the 9 serenities, and it was too late for him to devour. He could only take the blow head-on. The 9 spirits allowed him to devour so much power. It turned out that he had secretly taken away a trace of the origin of the original realm. It was not that he did not have any special abilities, but that the special abilities were not with him. The power of the 9 serenities almost shattered the entire void. The strange laws filled the entire space, and Taoist Netherworld was completely trapped in it. However, after a moment, Xiaopa sighed deeply. "Is it still too late?" "Yes, it's too late." Taoist Netherworld walked out slowly behind him. His body had been corroded beyond recognition, but his breath was still stable. He was even devouring a large amount of the laws around him. As long as he did not die, his power could be quickly replenished. Taoist Netherworld, who had been replenished by the power of the 9 serenities, was recovering at an amazing speed. He had a sneer on his face. If Xiaopa had stolen the origin faster, Taoist Netherworld's power would not have been so strong, and his body would not have begun to weaken. Then he might have been able to kill the enemy with one blow. After all, Taoist Netherworld did not have an astral realm. "Time stop? You hit well enough." He looked at Xiaopa coldly. At this time, he was not in a hurry to make a move. What the other party brought out from the original realm was not an ability, but an item. Xiaopa just shook his head gently. "I took a step back in the past, and today's result is deserved. But I lost, and you may not win." Xiaopa knew very well how strong Gu Nan was now. Based on their speculation about Gu Nan, his ability was likely to be related to his body. So after obtaining the origin of the original realm, Gu Nan's body became incredibly strong. Even if Taoist Netherworld had the power of devouring, he would not be able to deal with Gu Nan in this state. Taoist Netherworld naturally understood what Xiaopa was talking about, but he was not afraid. He just smiled and said, "So I came to you first. Only by eating your power can I be qualified to face him." Xiaopa's expression changed slightly, but his figure suddenly disappeared. The next moment, the power of devouring actually bit towards his head. Did he run away? Taoist Netherworld's eyes were cold, but he did not care much. He continued to devour Xiaopa's power. Star-Lord-type cultivators had all their power in the astral realm. Jiupo's escape would actually only speed up Daoist Netherworld's progress. Jupe also lost. Luwen sighed softly and said, his time stop is a bit late. Gunan had already learned of Jiupo's ability from Luwen. He actually brought out a pocket watch from the original realm that could temporarily stop time. Daoist Netherworld did not know about this, but in his previous life, Luwen, who was in the same generation as Jiupo, had seen his power. Just as Gunan expected, Luwen was the one who saw Jiupo's history. Daoist Netherworld only learned about it from him because he had been in the original realm for a long time. After Daoist Netherworld learned of Gunan's power, he deliberately confused the concept, hoping to lead Gunan in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, he did not expect that the appearance of Morag would directly change the entire situation. Now, everyone was sprinting to see who would be the final winner. Gunan's hands did not stop moving. He only asked curiously, you have studied for so many years. Do you know why the original realm would send people like us? Of course. Luwen nodded. What you're doing now, Daoist Netherworld, and I've tried it before. Because of this, I was able to enter the original realm with my spiritual soul. Back then, you wanted to become the next transmigrator. Yes, and I succeeded. Luwen's voice was filled with a hint of pride, but then there was a hint of dejection. But so what? If not for Morag's appearance, we probably would not even know that the thing that drove the power was the source of the original realm. That's all. Chapter 565. Gunan couldn't help but fall silent. Before people like him and Morag, who had the ability to produce the source of the original realm, appeared, they could only search blindly. There was no way they could find the source, unless they were willing to cut themselves open or find the next traveler in advance, before he used up the source. Before you transmigrated, did you also see the future history? Gunan asked after some thought. This was actually the most powerful force in the original realm. Luwen seemed to have steeled his heart to stand on Gunan's side and answered all his questions. That's right. In fact, I don't need to say more about this. You will see it when you continue to destroy the wall of the rules. Gunan raised his head and looked at the shattered bit wall, but he saw something shocking inside. It was some fragmented fragments of the future. Some were about the heavens, and some were about the gods, but the two sides were clearly separated. There were all kinds of things. Some were about powerful path integration cultivators like them, and some were small peddlers and pawns. Everything was there. There were even some fragments that contradicted each other, but as time passed, one of them would gradually die out. Gunan seemed to understand why the original realm's predictions of the future were so accurate, but only about the future of a single world. The essence of the Wall of the Rules is indeed a bit wall. It is connected to the bit wall of the two major worlds, Luwen's voice continued. But it itself has the power of foresight and can automatically deduce the future of the two major worlds. Once this kind of future was deduced, it would fall into the original realm and be obtained by some people through memory. Some people would then use this to make movies and literature, and eventually, more people would know about it. But this kind of prediction is not completely accurate. The power of foresight will eventually lean towards one world and completely deduce the future of this side. The other side will completely disappear until the next reincarnation. The next reincarnation would be when the next traveler appeared. Gunan nodded lightly. He understood the essence of the appearance of these travelers. In the end, it was caused by a special bit wall like the Wall of the Rules. Perhaps a long time ago, the original realm was just an ordinary plane. However, due to the influence of the Wall of Rules, it was separated from the two major worlds. The power of foresight. Gunan's gaze fell on the bit wall that was gradually breaking, and a faint smile appeared on his face. As long as it is destroyed, there will be no more travelers in the future. Luwen was taken aback. Before he could speak, another voice had already resounded. No, it's mine. Daoist Huang Quan's figure slowly appeared by Luwen's side. At this moment, only a thin layer of the Wall of Laws was left, and Gunan could even see a blurry silhouette on the other side. Luwen's expression instantly changed, his figure retreating at the first instant. However, Daoist Huang Quan didn't actually look at him. only staring at the wall of laws in an intoxicated manner. He was the one who had stayed in the original realm the longest and understood the wall of the rules the best. "It's mine," Taoist Huang Quan said solemnly with a calm expression. As he said this, his devouring power was already activated. His target was the fragments of the wall of rules, and he quickly swallowed them into his body. Feeling the rapid depletion of the source in his body, Taoist Huang Quan grew increasingly excited. His devouring power could devour everything in the world, and the only limitation was that he did not have enough source. Moreover, the stronger the thing he devoured, the more source it would consume. Now, he finally had sufficient source, and the source consumed to devour the wall of rules far exceeded any devouring process he had done in the past. Even when he devoured the extremely powerful power of the 9 underworlds, the speed at which he consumed source was less than half of what he was doing now. After all, the wall of the rules was the true source of the strangeness of the original realm. It was also the reason why everyone present could stand here. Power, this is true power. Taoist Huang Quan's eyes flashed, and the nomological laws had already begun to cover his entire body and were continuously extending outwards. His nomological laws were very special. They were the solidifying nomological laws that caused all things to stagnate. Under the influence of the solidifying nomological laws, not only did the void gradually stop flowing, even the wall of rules was restricted, and the changes in the future also slowed. Bang! There seemed to be a muffled sound in the void, and Taoist Huang Hun suddenly opened his eyes, only to see Gu Nin shattering the wall of rules with a punch and slowly walking out of the original realm. At this moment, Gu Nin became the first person in history to leave the original realm in a non-spiritual way. After the crack appeared on the wall of rules, it also began to rapidly disintegrate, even causing signs of collapse, melting like snowflakes. "No, this is my mind." Taoist Huang Quan's eyes widened in anger, and the blue veins on his forehead bulged. The solidifying nomological laws quickly swept towards Gu Nan. Gu did not even look at him. He casually smashed down with his fist, and the solidifying nomological laws around Taoist Huang Quan instantly collapsed, and his entire body flew backward like a cannonball. Taoist Huang Quan had devoured most of the power of the 9 underworlds, but even the 9 underworlds did not have the capital to stand in front of Gu Nan, let alone him. Gu Nan turned back and held the crack in the wall of rules with both hands. The shadow nomological laws began to quickly surge out, and the crack was rapidly expanding. In the blink of an eye, it had covered 1/5 of the area. During this process, his movements paused for a moment because he found that there was still a remnant of a spiritual soul within the wall of rules. It was Fu Cheng's spiritual soul. So she has merged with the wall of rules. Is it because she came out too early and the time of the previous transmigrator has not ended? With Gu Nan's current understanding of the wall of rules, he immediately understood why Fu Cheng was here. She had merged with the wall of rules. If another few hundred years had passed, she might have become the next Gu Nan. Unfortunately, she would not have a chance. As the wall of rules broke, Fu Cheng's spiritual soul also completely dissipated at the same time. Gu Nan, Taoist Huang Quan's voice sounded again. He rushed back from a void, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were cold as he looked forward. "Stop, or you will regret it," Taoist Huang Quan shouted at Gu Nan. The devouring power was still devouring the wall of rules. Gu Nan was never one to be swayed by words. He did not even look back as he continued to tear apart the bit wall of the original realm. It was not hard to imagine that once Gu Nan completely tore it apart, the original realm would merge with the outside world, and there would be no more transmigrators in the world. Taoist Huang Quan's face darkened. He suddenly turned around and shouted, "Eugene, how much longer are you going to wait?" The void seemed to have frozen, and a golden light lit up behind Gu Nan. It was the Lord of War, Eugene, who had been hiding for a long time. Gu Nan was originally perfect and flawless, with almost no weaknesses to speak of. Even the Banishing God spell could only trap him for a while. However, The scheme of Austin and the other sovereigns had created a weakness in his body. Gunan suddenly turned around and punched straight through Eugene's heart. The Lord of War did not even have time to react. However, Eugene seemed to have expected this. There was no surprise in his eyes. Instead, he grinned and sent the golden light in his hand to Gunan. Inside the golden light, there were 4 colors, one black and one white, with a mysterious aura. This is the essence of the 2 god kingdoms. Gunan raised his eyebrows and immediately understood what Austin had done. No wonder the power of the banishing divine spell was weaker than Gunan had imagined. It turned out that the 2 had not used their full strength. In the golden light in Eugene's hand, the aura of 4 top main gods had gathered. With the 2 god kingdoms as a bridge, the power of the 4 had truly merged together. At this moment, the mark of life and death on Gunan's body, which was about to dissipate, suddenly lit up again. This was Austin's last resort. He had used the power of 4 main gods to trigger the mark of life and death. The banishing divine spell was only to numb the opponent and achieve the effect of a one-hit kill. If Gunan was still alive after this attack, the 4 main gods who had sacrificed themselves would never be able to return. Priest Netherworld looked at this scene coldly. He had been hiding near the original realm and had been aware of the big movements of the 2 realms. Naturally, what Austin and the others had done could not be hidden from him. Gunan, your power has not reached its complete state yet. You have not taken a last step, have you? Priest Netherworld's voice sounded slowly. If you hide in the original realm and comprehend the wall of rules to take that step, you might have a chance. Unfortunately, as Priest Netherworld's voice trailed off, the golden light in the void became more and more dazzling, even giving off a sense of heat. Then, the golden light quickly converged and fell on the mark on Gunan's abdomen, causing Gunan's life to be completely cut off. There was no longer any sign of life. It's over. Giopo's figure appeared beside Lu Wan and shook his head slowly. He had thought that no one could catch up with Gunan, who had moved too fast. He did not expect that in the end, Netherworld and the main gods would join forces to turn the tables. Eugene covered his chest with one hand. The punch from Gunan before his death had instantly injured him so severely that he could hardly move. However, it was all worth it to kill the evil god. Priest Netherworld continued to devour the wall of rules. Now, no one could compete with him. The only thing that dissatisfied him was that a large part of the rules had been destroyed by Gunan. As for Gunan's completely lifeless body, he only glanced at it and paid no more attention. No matter how valuable Gunan's body was, it was not as important as his own strength. However, at this moment, Eugene's expression suddenly changed. His entire body seemed to have been penetrated by some kind of huge force from behind, and his abdomen was directly torn apart. Eugene's body instantly fell into pieces in the void. Gunan walked out from behind him with his neck twisted, a sinister smile on his face. The imprint is all right, but the strength is a little lacking. He touched the life and death imprint on his abdomen. The power on it had almost completely dissipated. Eugene had gathered the power of 4 main gods and finally triggered the final attack of the life and death imprint. Although it had worked, it had also completely exhausted the imprint's power. More importantly, the life and death imprint did not have the expected effect. Priest Netherworld looked over in a daze, as if he could not understand how Gunan, who had clearly died, could come back to life. In his eyes, the Gunan just now was definitely completely dead. Even his spirit had been destroyed in an instant. Not even the astral realm could save him. Gunan slowly walked up to Priest Netherworld, then looked at Eugene, who had been torn apart by him, and could not help but shake his head. If Austin knew that the time he fought for with his life was wasted by you just like that, would he be so angry that he would come back to life? Gunan said in a somewhat amused tone. He finally understood Austin's plan. From the beginning, the main god of light had gambled that Gunan would sooner or later have a conflict with other powerhouses. He had asked Eugene to attack at the critical moment, hoping to activate Gunan's life and death imprint, and then completely destroy Gunan's body. If it was a normal time, his plan would not be wrong at all. Taoist Huang Quan would definitely kill him and not leave any chance for Gunan. Unfortunately, it was not normal now. The wall of law was right in front of him. So how could Priest Netherworld care about anything else? Austin also did not expect that with Gunan's current power, even with the power of four main gods, the state of life and death caused by the transformation of life and death only lasted for a short moment. It was not until Gunan came back to life that Priest Netherworld stopped moving and retreated. With just one step, Gunan instantly broke through his frozen space and came directly in front of him. At this time, Priest Netherworld's mind, which was disturbed by the power, seemed to have recovered, and his face gradually calmed down. You are still one step away, right? I have a way to help you. Priest Netherworld lowered his head and tried to make his voice sound normal. Gunan did not speak, and Priest Netherworld continued. You may be like Jiopa, who crossed over with something, but now it has been destroyed. So what if I am? I can help you. Priest Netherworld's voice suddenly rose. I know the original realm the best, and I know how to bring out the power I want. Leave the wall of law, and you will have a chance to take the last step. Just find someone who brought out the same thing as you. And you can keep an eye on me at any time. Don't worry about me being a threat. Priest Netherworld's words became smoother and smoother, as if he had even convinced himself. Speaking of this, he pointed to Lu Wan and Jiop over there and said, the same is true for them. As long as you keep an eye on us and don't let us come into contact with the origin, you don't need to take any risks. He stared into Gunan's eyes and said in a low voice, think about it. With your current realm, as long as you take one more step, you can see the end of the world, the ultimate truth, the power. Why? When Priest Netherworld finished speaking, he finally saw that Gunan did not seem to be listening to him. The Shadow Rule had quickly invaded the wall of law and completely destroyed it. How is it? Has your devouring ability disappeared? Gunan turned around and looked at him. He didn't show a satisfied smile until he saw Taoist Netherworld's sudden change of expression. Keeping Taoist Huang Quan alive was to verify this point. The special abilities of all transmigrators came from the Wall of Law. Even after they left the original realm, this connection still existed. Now that Gunan had destroyed the Wall of Law, it meant that they were completely free from his control. Even Gunan himself felt his body lighten, and a fragment of the evil god's temple that had melted into his body seemed to have disappeared at this moment. Why? Priest Netherworld looked at him in disbelief. You could have gone one step further. Why, I've already won. Gunan patted him on the shoulder and said with a faint smile, the winner does not need to gamble anymore. Chapter 566. I won't admit that it's a lousy ending because I've already written what I wanted to write. Although it wouldn't be too much of a problem to write another 500,000 words, it would be meaningless to keep repeating the same old routine. In conclusion, this isn't a lousy ending. It's just a little too short. About the new book. The new book will be released at approximately 8:20 p.m. on November 23rd, 2017. The new book will be released at approximately 8:20 p.m. on November 23rd, 2017. The new book will be released at approximately 8:20 p.m. on November 23rd, 2017. The tentative title of the book will be Time Everyone Show. There's a high probability that it won't pass the review, so it will probably be changed. Introduction, pay for your time, and you can get everything you want. Mr. Su Jun, the director of the Time Exchange. When Su Jun picked up the book with the name of Time, he only had 3 days left to live. Within his limited lifespan, he had to collect a commission from the transaction of time or by the remnant page of the Book of Time from the seller to extend his life. If he couldn't buy it, well, he could just rob it. Chapter 567. P.S. My new book, I want to turn over a new leaf and build a harmonious society. The protagonist will never kill indiscriminately. Serious face. Crossing the heavens and becoming an evil god. New book, Time Plunder. Currently typing. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 568. Traversing the heavens and becoming an evil god. New book, Booster Empire. Currently typing. please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update.